They told you this was about safety, but that was the cover story. The shocking truth is that this new law is about money, power, and taking control of every rider's freedom. Helmets aren't just gear anymore. They're legal lifelines, with price tags that could rival a month's rent. Training courses aren't lessons. They're tolls, draining wallets and forcing riders into a system built on profit, not passion. And here's the part no one wants to admit. This law doesn't just change what you wear, it changes who decides how you ride. It's a cultural earthquake shaking every rider, every club, and every tradition that defined the open road. If you stop watching now, you'll miss the truth lawmakers, insurers, and investors don't want you to hear. Stay with me until the end, because only then will you see the full picture. The hidden price tag of safety. The first shock of the new law was not in a courtroom or a rally. It was in the checkout line. Riders walked into dealerships expecting chrome, leather, and the smell of gasoline, only to be greeted by price tags that felt more like luxury watches than safety gear. Helmets once treated as accessories became legal lifelines, and their cost skyrocketed overnight. The law had turned every helmet into a ticket to ride, and tickets were never cheap. For a factory worker in Ohio, that meant choosing between groceries for his kids and a $500 compliant helmet. For a college student in Arizona, it meant selling a beloved vintage guitar just to keep her motorcycle on the road. These were not abstract numbers on a government spreadsheet. They were heartbreaks, sacrifices, and small betrayals of the freedom motorcycling once promised. The insult stung sharper when riders realized the spending would not end with helmets. Mandatory safety courses came with price tags rivaling community college tuition. Add in travel costs for rural riders forced to drive hundreds of miles to find an approved class, and the totals crept toward thousands. What was once an escape from the grind of bills and budgets had itself become another bill and another burden. Supporters claimed you cannot put a price on a human life. Riders replied that lawmakers had already done exactly that. But what you lose in money, you might lose even more in freedom. When freedom meets regulation. Your ride, your rules. That has been the unspoken creed of American bikers for decades. Whether it is a lone rider tearing across desert highways or a pack roaring through a small town, the motorcycle has symbolized independence in a way cars never could. That spirit is now colliding head-on with government regulation. For the first time in modern history, Washington is dictating not only the machine you ride, but the gear you wear and the lessons you must take before rolling onto the road. To many riders, this is a betrayal of the very idea of motorcycling. They argue that risk is part of the deal, that the open wind and the unshielded body are as essential to the experience as the engine itself. Now, they face inspections and citations for helmets deemed unfit by a bureaucrat's checklist. A rebellious gesture, riding bareheaded through summer streets, has been reclassified as a finable offense. Supporters counter that freedom without responsibility is reckless, and that society shoulders the medical costs of head trauma when riders crash without proper protection. But the pushback is fierce. Advocacy groups warn that this is a slippery slope. If the state can force you to wear a helmet, what stops it from dictating the kind of motorcycle you own, the roads you ride, or the very decision to ride at all? And for communities built on rebellion, the clash was personal. Have you ever broken a law or got a ticket while riding your bike? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear. A culture on the edge. The motorcycle has always carried more than just riders. It has carried identity. Veterans coming home from war found healing in the roar of the engine. Blue-collar workers forged brotherhoods in weekend rides. Artists, rebels, and free spirits shaped entire subcultures around the bike. Now that culture feels under siege. Clubs that once debated chrome versus matte are suddenly locked in arguments about compliance. Older riders recall the battles of the 1970s when states tried to impose universal helmet laws, only to face uprisings from biker groups. Younger riders who grew up with safety campaigns and insurance discounts are less certain, creating generational divides inside the same community. What united them? Freedom, now risks splitting them apart. The sense of betrayal runs deeper than regulation. For many, the motorcycle is not just transportation, but a philosophy. The leather jacket, the open visor, the exposed arms, they are statements of defiance, ways of saying, "I decide how I live." To strip that choice feels like stripping dignity. Yet others within the same community see a different future. Safer riders, fewer funerals, and a culture that proves it can adapt without losing its soul. The debate is tearing at the very fabric of biker identity, but culture wars are only the beginning. The state is ready to enforce. Before we dive deeper, make sure you smash that subscribe button. Every day, I break down the stories others won't tell you. Don't miss what's coming next, because this fight is only just getting started. The crackdown starts here. Laws mean little without teeth, and this law has them. Police departments across the country are preparing for a new wave of enforcement. Riders can expect checkpoints on popular routes, surprise inspections near rallies, and fines that escalate with every violation. The ticket for riding without a certified helmet will not be a slap on the wrist. In some states, the first offense carries a penalty of over $200, and repeat offenses can climb past $1,000. Insurance points add insult to injury, raising premiums before riders even fix their helmets. Enforcement extends beyond helmets. Training certifications must be carried like licenses, and officers will have authority to suspend riding privileges on the spot if paperwork is missing. Rural departments, already stretched thin, face the challenge of balancing public safety with limited resources. Urban departments, on the other hand, see an opportunity to justify larger budgets, citing the need for new equipment and staff to handle compliance checks. For riders, the message is clear. Compliance is not optional, and defiance will be costly. Some predict an underground market of counterfeit certifications and imported helmets that mimic the look but not the safety of approved gear. Others warn of escalating tensions at roadside stops where a helmet check turns into a confrontation. The crackdown is not just about helmets. It is about authority asserting itself over a culture that has long thrived on resistance. And riders quickly realized money and tickets were not the worst hurdle. Need compliant, rider-tested gear without the markup? Check the description. Helmet shortlist, training essentials, and budget upgrades are all linked. Training bottlenecks nobody saw coming. The law promised a safer nation of riders, but it overlooked one critical detail: training capacity. Almost overnight, enrollment in motorcycle safety courses tripled. Riders eager to stay compliant logged onto state websites only to discover months-long waiting lists. In urban centers, classes booked up within hours of being posted, leaving desperate riders refreshing screens like fans chasing concert tickets. In rural areas, the situation was worse. Many counties had only a single instructor certified under the new federal guidelines, and some had none at all. Stories began circulating of riders driving hundreds of miles just to take a class. For some, the trip itself was more dangerous than their daily commute. A 45-year-old truck mechanic in Nebraska explained that he would lose 2 days of work and nearly $200 in gas simply to complete the mandated course. The irony was painful. A law designed to make riding safer was forcing people onto highways for long, exhausted road trips just to qualify. State governments promised to expand capacity, but training centers do not appear overnight. While riders waited, they risked citations every time they climbed onto their bikes. And just when classes filled up, another bottleneck hit the road: the helmet supply shock. Riders who managed to complete training soon encountered the second wave of disruption: helmets. The new standards effectively wiped out huge swaths of existing inventory. Retailers pulled non-compliant models from shelves, leaving gaps that manufacturers could not fill fast enough. Shoppers walked into dealerships only to find display racks stripped bare. Online stores listed popular models as back-ordered for months. Prices spiked. A helmet that sold for $200 last summer now carried a price tag of $400 or more. Families with multiple riders faced impossible decisions: who gets the compliant gear first and who risks riding illegally. Some turned to secondhand markets, only to find opportunists selling used helmets at inflated prices. The surge in demand created a gray market of imports with fake certification labels, a dangerous alternative for riders desperate to stay legal. Manufacturers insisted they were racing to ramp up production, but safety testing is not quick. Each model must pass rigorous evaluations before being approved. Companies that cut corners faced federal penalties, making delays inevitable. Smaller helmet brands, unable to afford the retooling, closed their doors altogether. For riders, it felt like another betrayal. Completing the training was hard enough, but riding still carried the risk of being fined simply because shelves were empty. But shortages were just the start. Some riders took the fight to court. The first lawsuits dropped. It was only a matter of time before the courtroom doors swung open. Within weeks of the law's rollout, riders backed by civil liberty groups filed lawsuits challenging its constitutionality. Their argument was simple: the government cannot mandate personal choices that affect only the individual. They pointed to precedent, arguing that if citizens could refuse certain medical treatments, why could they not refuse a helmet? Advocacy groups framed the battle as one of freedom versus control. In Texas, a coalition of biker clubs staged a dramatic entrance into a courthouse. Dozens of riders in leather jackets marching shoulder to shoulder to file a class action suit. In Washington, D.C., lobbyists pressed lawmakers to amend the law, calling it a violation of the 10th Amendment and an overreach of federal power. The government defended its position by citing public health costs. Head trauma, they argued, burdens taxpayers through emergency medical care and disability payments. Early rulings were mixed, with some judges granting temporary relief while others dismissed cases outright. The legal process promised years of appeals, but one fact was undeniable: riders were no longer just protesting on highways. They were fighting in the nation's highest institutions. And while lawyers battled, the economy quietly shifted beneath riders' feet. The ripple through the motorcycle economy. The law's ripple effects did not stop with riders. Entire industries tied to motorcycling began to wobble. Dealerships, already struggling with supply chain disruptions from the pandemic years, now faced inventory chaos. Customers came in looking for compliant helmets or training vouchers, but not necessarily for new bikes. Sales of motorcycles dipped, while service departments became inundated with riders seeking inspections or documentation. Repair shops felt the strain too. Some riders delayed maintenance to cover the cost of training and helmets, meaning fewer jobs for mechanics. Custom builders, who thrived on unique modifications, discovered that many of their creations were now technically non-compliant. One California builder explained that his business dropped by half because customers were afraid any alteration might void their certification. Aftermarket gear sellers took the hardest hit. Leather shops, visor designers, and accessory makers relied on impulse purchases during rallies. But with wallets drained by compliance costs, those extras became luxuries few could afford. Entire towns that hosted major motorcycle festivals reported steep declines in revenue as vendors pulled out. The law was meant to save lives, but in practice it was reshaping an entire economy. Where once the motorcycle industry celebrated freedom and choice, it now scrambled to adapt to red tape and shortages. But while businesses scrambled, insurance companies rewrote the rules. Your insurance company just changed the game. Insurance companies wasted no time seizing on the new law. For decades, they have built complex models to calculate risk, and now they had a new variable: compliance. Riders who could prove they had completed federally approved training and owned a certified helmet saw modest discounts. Those who delayed or resisted faced the opposite. Premiums shot up by as much as 30% for riders flagged as non-compliant. Some companies went further, refusing coverage altogether for repeat offenders. The shift was not only financial but deeply personal. Riders were now judged not just by their driving records, but by their willingness to submit to regulation. Insurers began tracking compliance as closely as mileage or accident history. A missed training renewal or an outdated helmet could trigger an automatic penalty. For families with teenagers eager to learn riding, premiums doubled unless parents could present proof of training within a set window. Behind the scenes, insurance executives framed the move as a matter of fairness. Why should compliant riders subsidize the risk of those who refused? Yet critics argued this was coercion in disguise, forcing riders into compliance not through law alone, but through financial pressure. What began as a safety mandate was quickly becoming a surveillance-driven scorecard, one that followed riders into every policy renewal. And when insurers adjusted, hospitals started noticing something shocking: hospitals without helmets. Emergency rooms across the country reported a change almost immediately. Doctors accustomed to treating severe head trauma from motorcycle crashes suddenly noticed fewer cases arriving through their doors. In cities like Phoenix and Dallas, weekend accident tallies dropped, and the injuries that did appear were often less catastrophic. Nurses who had long braced themselves for bloody Saturday nights remarked on the difference: fewer skull fractures, fewer traumatic brain injuries, and more survivors walking away. Public health officials began running the numbers. Within 6 months of the law's implementation, the national rate of motorcycle-related head injuries fell by nearly 20%. That decline translated into billions of dollars in savings. Taxpayers, often footing the bill for uninsured riders, shouldered a lighter burden. Yet the picture was not universally positive. Some communities reported unintended consequences: riders delaying hospital visits because they feared being fined for non-compliance, or uninsured riders avoiding care altogether. Trauma surgeons warned that underreporting might skew the statistics, masking hidden dangers. The medical community largely agreed that the law was saving lives, but they also cautioned against celebrating too soon. Helmets could reduce injuries, but they could not erase the deeper cultural tension building outside hospital walls. But fewer injuries raised a harder question: safety at what cultural cost? The safety win. Nobody can ignore. Numbers rarely silence debate, but the statistics emerging from the new mandate were hard to dismiss. By the end of the first year, fatal motorcycle crashes dropped by nearly 30% nationwide. That meant thousands of families spared from late-night phone calls, thousands of children who would still see a parent come home, thousands of friends not gathering for funerals. It was, by every measurable standard, a safety victory. Government agencies rolled out charts and graphs showcasing the success. Federal officials proudly declared the law one of the most effective traffic safety reforms in decades. Insurance executives used the numbers to justify their compliance-driven premium structures. Medical associations issued press releases pointing to the reductions in head trauma as proof that the investment was worth the pain. And yet, the rider community remained split. For some, the statistics proved what they had resisted acknowledging: helmets save lives. For others, the data was irrelevant. They saw survival rates rising but freedom shrinking, a bargain they never agreed to make. The numbers could not quantify pride, identity, or the exhilaration of taking risks on your own terms. It was the paradox at the heart of the debate: undeniable safety paired with undeniable resentment. If this opened your eyes, imagine what's still ahead. Hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and share this video. The next chapter of this story is already unfolding, and trust me, you'll want front row seats. Investors smell profit. While protesters burned fuel on highways, investors lit up trading floors. Wall Street analysts quickly realized the law was not only a cultural flashpoint, but a market boom. Helmet manufacturers that had been mid-tier players suddenly found themselves with order books overflowing. Companies producing training curricula saw their valuations double almost overnight. Insurance giants, too, benefited as compliance metrics gave them new tools to adjust premiums and expand profit margins. Investment funds scrambled to scoop up shares in companies tied to compliance. Startups developing smart helmets equipped with augmented reality visors and biometric sensors suddenly became hot commodities. Training firms raised venture capital to expand facilities, promising to build classrooms and simulators across the Midwest and South. Even technology firms with no prior ties to motorcycling began experimenting, pitching helmet-integrated navigation and emergency alert systems. Behind closed doors, private equity firms began eyeing consolidation opportunities, targeting small regional training schools and folding them into national chains. Venture capitalists whispered about turning compliance into a lifelong subscription model, annual safety renewals, data-driven helmets, and bundled insurance products. What looked like regulation on the surface was, for investors, the birth of a new financial ecosystem. Yet not every business thrived. Small aftermarket gear shops watched as sales collapsed, unable to meet the rigid standards. Custom builders lost clients, and rallies that once fueled local economies shrank as disposable income vanished into compliance costs. Investors treated these casualties not as tragedies, but as opportunities to consolidate markets. The message from Wall Street was simple. Regulation may anger riders, but it feeds markets. But markets were not the only ones watching, so were governments overseas. The global ripple effect. As images of protests and profits spread, foreign governments took notice. European Union officials, long accustomed to tight road safety rules, studied the American experiment as proof that sweeping reform was possible, even in a country famous for resisting mandates. Within months, committees in Brussels began drafting proposals to harmonize helmet standards across all member states, citing the dramatic drop in American fatalities. In Asia, the response was even sharper. Nations with massive motorbike populations, such as India and Vietnam, weighed stricter safety mandates, eager to curb the staggering number of deaths on their roads. Chinese manufacturers, already key suppliers of affordable helmets, accelerated research into compliant designs, positioning themselves as global leaders in the new era of regulated riding. Even Latin American governments, where enforcement is often inconsistent, debated whether the United States had set a precedent too significant to ignore. Observers in Africa added a different perspective, noting that helmet compliance there often falters due to affordability rather than resistance. For them, America's model highlighted a challenge. Laws mean little without economic access. International aid groups began discussing subsidies, hinting that global safety reform may require not only mandates, but also massive financial support. The globalization of safety standards threatened to reshape the motorcycle industry at every level. What began as an American cultural battle now reverberated across continents, turning helmets into symbols of international policy alignment. For some, this was a triumph of progress. For others, it was a chilling example of how quickly national choices could spread worldwide. And for Americans, it raises one final personal question. Who really controls the ride? Strip away the helmets, the protests, the lawsuits, and the market booms, and what remains is a deeper question about control. Who decides how free an individual truly is on the open road? The state insists it has the authority to protect lives, pointing to undeniable safety gains. Riders counter that autonomy is worth the risk, that freedom means little if it only exists within boundaries approved by lawmakers and insurers. The truth is that this law has become more than a road safety measure. It is a mirror reflecting the national tension between individual liberty and collective responsibility. To some, it represents progress, proof that lives can be saved through regulation. To others, it is a warning shot, a reminder that each concession of freedom invites the next. The motorcycle, once a symbol of rebellion, is now the centerpiece of a cultural reckoning. In the years ahead, the battle may spread beyond helmets into other aspects of mobility, autonomous vehicle mandates, biometric monitoring, or speed controls. The precedent has been set. Technology and government can and will dictate the terms of risk. Riders may continue to resist, but the machinery of compliance is already built. Because this is not just about helmets, it is about who owns the road ahead. So here's the truth. This law was never just about helmets. It's about money, power, and who gets to decide the limits of your freedom. From highways filled with protests to boardrooms cashing in, every move tells the same story. Your choices are shrinking, and someone else is writing the rules. The question is, will you stay silent or will you stay informed? If this opened your eyes, subscribe right now, drop a comment, and share this video. Because the next fight is already brewing, and trust me, you do not want to be left behind.